The night my wife asked me to leave, it was 19 degrees. I stood in my own driveway holding a garbage bag full of clothes while she watched from the porch, and her son leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed and something close to a smile on his face. "Damon needs to feel settled," she said. "And honestly, Warren, so do I." I looked past her into the living room. My work boots were still by the front door. My tools were still in the garage. Our wedding photo was still hanging on the wall above the fireplace I'd rebuilt 3 years ago, brick by brick, on a Saturday in October when she'd been at her sister's. Apparently the house still wanted all of those things. It just didn't want me. That was the night I learned how quietly a man can be made to disappear from his own life. My name is Warren Doyle. I was 53 years old when my wife told me to leave because her 23-year-old son needed room to breathe. January 19th. I remember the date because it fell 3 days before our anniversary. Miriam and I had been married 9 years. Not storybook years, not the kind that end up in magazine features, but steady ones. We paid our mortgage. We cooked on Sundays. We argued about the thermostat and whose turn it was to call the plumber. We weren't on fire, but we weren't broken. Or so I'd believed. Damon had moved back in 7 months earlier after things didn't pan out in Phoenix. That was how Miriam framed it. Things didn't pan out. Like the city itself had been at fault. What it meant in practice was this. He slept until 11, ran the hot water until the tank gave up, and regarded me the way you regard a piece of furniture someone else chose, and you've always found slightly ugly. I had installed the floors in that house, hardwood throughout, every plank, measured and cut and fitted by hand, over a long Labor Day weekend. I'd resided the garage after the storm 2 winters back. I'd rebuilt the front porch steps when Miriam's mother visited and declared them a safety hazard. Every repair, every upgrade, every Sunday spent on my knees fixing something that nobody else had thought to fix. All of it had my name on it in ways that didn't show up on the deed. None of it seemed to count that night. The argument that started everything was almost embarrassingly small. I'd asked Damon for the 3rd time that week to rinse his dishes before leaving them in the sink. He'd looked at me the way young men look at inconvenient rules, with the flat patience of someone waiting for an adult to finish talking. "He's still adjusting," Miriam said later, stepping between us in the kitchen. "He's 23, I said, "not 13. That was apparently the wrong thing to say. After dinner, Miriam asked me to sit down at the kitchen table. Damon stood in the hallway, arms folded, watching like a referee who already knew the outcome. "I think it would be better," she began, her voice careful and practiced, "if you stayed somewhere else for a little while." "How long?" "A few weeks. Just until things settle." "What things?" I asked. "What exactly is unsettled?" She looked tired but not conflicted. That's what I remember most. There was no uncertainty in her eyes, no wrestling. She'd already arrived at this decision before she sat down. "He doesn't feel comfortable here," she said. "In my house?" The words came out before I decided to say them. Her jaw tightened. "Our house." "And me?" I asked. "Do I feel comfortable here?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. In the hallway, Damon shifted his weight and looked at the wall, suppressing something I didn't want to name. I went upstairs. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam anything. I found a black garbage bag under the bathroom sink and started loading my clothes into it because I couldn't locate my old duffel, and I wasn't going to spend 20 minutes searching for it while they waited downstairs. My hands were too steady. The kind of steady that means the body has gone ahead of the mind into shock. Miriam appeared in the bedroom doorway while I was folding a flannel shirt. "This doesn't have to be a production," she said. "I'm not making it one," I said. "I'm just leaving." She flinched slightly, but she didn't move to stop me. I packed jeans, work clothes, my steel toes. I left the framed photo from our trip to Savannah. I left the coffee mug from the pottery class she dragged me to on our 5th anniversary. I left the reading chair that fit the angle of my back exactly right, the one I'd spent an hour adjusting before I bought it. When I came downstairs with the bag, Damon had drifted closer to the front door. "Better for everyone, probably," he said. I looked at him for a long moment. A young man who had never paid a mortgage, never fixed a leaking pipe at midnight, never sat at a kitchen table calculating how to make a paycheck stretch through an unexpected transmission repair. "For who?" I asked. He didn't answer. Miriam opened the front door. The cold hit me in the face like a flat hand. I stepped onto the porch and stood there for a moment, half hoping she'd say something that sounded like she meant it. She didn't. "Let me know when you've had some time to think," she said. I walked to my truck. The engine turned over on the 3rd try. The heater groaned and pushed out lukewarm air that surrendered to the cold within a few minutes. I sat there with both hands on the wheel and watched the porch light go out. 9 years. And just like that, I was the complication. I drove without a real destination at first. Slow loops through streets I recognized. Past the diner where we used to eat breakfast on Saturday mornings. Past the Ace Hardware where the guy at the register knew me by first name. I ended up in the parking lot of a 24-hour ShopRite off the county road. Lit up, open, anonymous. I pulled into a spot near the back fence, away from the entrance but under a light. I reclined the seat as far as it would go. I told myself it was temporary. A cooling off, a misunderstanding. The kind of friction that marriages hit and recover from. But something heavier had already settled in my chest. Something that didn't feel like friction at all. The cold came in slowly through the floor panels. My breath fogged the windshield in slow pulses. I turned the engine on twice, just long enough to push the chill back, then shut it off to save gas I might need. I thought about calling her. Then I imagined the phone ringing inside the house, and Damon glancing at the screen, and Miriam deciding to let it go. I set the phone down. Midnight. 1, 2. Not a single message. That was when it became real, not the argument, not the garbage bag, not the porch light cutting out. It was the silence. Because if someone believes you're coming back, if someone wonders whether you're safe, they reach out. Nobody reached out. And sitting there in that parking lot, watching frost form on the inside of the windshield, I understood something I'd been resisting all evening. This wasn't about space. This was about replacement. And it had already happened. I didn't really sleep that night. I drifted into something between exhaustion and cold, jolted back awake twice by the sound of a cart return, and once by my own dreaming. By 4 a.m, I had memorized the pattern of cracks in the windshield and the exact pitch of the ShopRite's outdoor refrigeration units humming across the lot. The second night I moved to the lot behind the public library, quieter, fewer eyes. I was parked near the rear fence when a knock came at the driver's window around 11 p.m. Sharp but not threatening. A flashlight beam cut across the cab. I rolled the window down. "You all right out here?" He was maybe 65, gray-bearded, wearing a security jacket zipped all the way up. His name tag read, Roy Hatch. "Fine," I said automatically. He looked at me the way men look at each other when they've both seen enough of life to recognize when something is off. "You been out here a couple nights?" I didn't answer that directly. "Something like that." He didn't press. Instead, he pulled a paper cup from his jacket pocket, the kind that comes from a lobby vending machine. "Coffee's terrible," he said, "but it's hot." I took it. "Thank you." He leaned an arm on the doorframe. 22 years Navy, he said, not to brag, just to explain something about himself. Seen men let pride freeze them solid long before the weather got to them. I nodded. "Library opens at 9, he said. "Restrooms are inside. Nobody'll bother you before then." He tapped the door twice and walked away without asking me a single question about how I'd ended up there. That man, a stranger with a flashlight and a night shift, showed me more decency in 5 minutes than I'd received in my own house all week. The third night was the hardest, not for the cold, but for what I found when I checked my phone. The bank account password had been changed. My card was declined at a drive-through. I had enough cash for a few days, but the message underneath the mechanics was unmistakable. Access revoked. I texted Miriam. "My card isn't working." "Did something change with the account?" No reply. I called 30 minutes later. 2 rings, then voicemail. An hour after that, straight to voicemail, I tried Damon. 1 ring, then nothing. Call dropped, then blocked. I sat in the dark cab, staring at my phone screen until it dimmed on its own. I had spent years fixing that house, replacing doorknobs, cleaning gutters, paying insurance premiums, keeping the water heater running and the deck board sound. And I couldn't get a returned call. The humiliation of it didn't announce itself loudly. It arrived the way cold does, quietly, through every gap you didn't know existed. Around 11, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I hadn't expected. "Marcus here. Phil mentioned you might be in a rough spot. You need a place? Marcus Beale." We'd worked together for 6 years at the same municipal maintenance crew before he moved into a supervisory role across the county. I hadn't heard from him in months. Apparently word moves faster than pride. I typed back slowly. "Just a few nights. I don't want to be a burden." He called instead of responding. "Warren," he said, skipping hello entirely. "You helped me gut my kitchen after the pipe burst, and I was 2 weeks from bankruptcy. Get in the truck." I closed my eyes. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Porch light'll be on." It was. Not a motion sensor, actually on, waiting. He opened the door before I knocked. "Bag goes in the second room. We talk tomorrow." Inside the house smelled like coffee and warm laundry and stability. I hadn't noticed how tightly I'd been carrying my shoulders until I was standing somewhere it was safe to put them down. That night, lying on a real mattress in a room with mismatched sheets and a crooked curtain rod, I let myself say the thing I'd been circling around for 3 days. This wasn't temporary. Miriam hadn't asked me to take space. She'd made a choice. She'd chosen her son over her husband and handed me the result in the form of a garbage bag and a cold porch. The next morning, Marcus made eggs and didn't ask me to talk about it. "You're not going back to that truck," he said, sliding a plate across the table. "After that, we figure it out." "We?" I asked. He shrugged. "That's how it works." No speeches, no conditions. Just a man who didn't need convincing. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a different thought had started forming. Quiet at first, then louder as the days passed. If I was that easy to remove from my own home, what story was already being told about why I'd gone? Because silence fills itself, and I had a feeling mine was being rewritten while I wasn't in the room to correct it. The confirmation came 10 days later. Marcus and I were watching football when a message came through from Renata, Miriam's cousin, someone I'd seen at holidays and exchanged birthday texts with over the years. "Hey Warren, just checking in. Heard you and Miriam are going through a separation. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the words. A separation, like we'd sat down with a calendar and negotiated terms. 3 dots. She mentioned you needed some space, that things were tense at home, and you decided to take some time. My jaw tightened. You decided, as though I had packed a trash bag by choice, as though I had chosen the frost on the windshield. I typed carefully. It wasn't mutual, Renata. I didn't decide to leave. Her response took a while. Then, "Oh, just that." Later that evening, Marcus's wife, Diane, walked in from the kitchen holding her phone out. "Warren, you need to see this." She turned the screen toward me. Miriam had posted a photo. The living room, my living room, rearranged. My reading chair was gone. In its place was a low-slung leather armchair I'd never seen. Damon sat in it with his feet on the coffee table, remote in hand. Miriam stood beside him, hand on his shoulder, smiling at the camera like it was Christmas morning. The caption read, "Grateful for a new chapter and the people who make this house a home." 51 likes. Comments about fresh starts, peace, growth. Not a single word about the man who had installed the floors they were standing on. Diane lowered the phone. "She didn't mention you." "She didn't have to," I said. The absence was the message. The man who had rebuilt the porch steps, re-sided the garage, cut every board in the back deck by hand, quietly edited out of the frame, like a production error. Over the next few days, the pattern sharpened. A co-worker pulled me aside at the facility where I worked maintenance. "Heard you stepped away for a while," he said, careful with his phrasing. "Like a reset?" "Is that what you heard?" He nodded. Miriam told someone, word got around. A reset. Clean. Responsible sounding. Infinitely easier than my wife asked me to leave because her adult son found me inconvenient. I didn't correct him. Not yet. But something inside me had started hardening, not into bitterness, but into resolve. Because if I stayed silent long enough, I wouldn't just lose the house. I would lose the truth of what had happened inside it. And the truth, I was learning, has a shelf life if nobody tends to it. I checked the joint account again. Not just the password changed. My name had been removed entirely. I had signed those account papers at a desk downtown 9 years ago. Now I was legally erased from them in under 2 weeks. The bank sent a confirmation call. A representative named Sandra explained with practiced neutrality that the account was now listed solely under Miriam Dalton, her maiden name, they already reinstated. "Do you wish to dispute the change?" "No," I said slowly. "I'm aware." By the end of that first month, the picture was complete. I hadn't left. I had been removed. And while I'd been sleeping in a truck and then on a borrowed mattress, the story spreading through our shared social circle was simple and tidy. Warren needed some space. Warren is figuring things out. Warren chose to step back. Nobody mentioned the garbage bag. Nobody mentioned the cold. Nobody mentioned that I'd stood on my own porch at 11 o'clock at night with $60 in my wallet and nowhere to go. And the more I heard that version repeated, the more I understood something I should have recognized sooner. If you don't tell your story, someone else will, and they will not be careful with it. That was the moment the shame started becoming something else, not revenge, not anger, just clarity. Because if I let that narrative stand, I wouldn't just lose a house. I'd lose the account of what happened in it. And I wasn't prepared to lose that too. The first month after Marcus's spare room, I didn't make declarations or post anything or call anyone to set the record straight. I went to work. That's what I did. Every morning at 6:15, I drove to the county maintenance facility, filled my thermos, and walked into the day with the particular kind of focus that comes from needing something solid to stand on. I checked HVAC systems. I replaced ballast fixtures. I diagnosed what was broken and I fixed it. There's an honesty to that kind of work. A motor fails, you find the fault, you fix it, you test it. Either it runs or it doesn't. No narrative, no revision, just function. After 3 weeks, Marcus stopped pretending my stay was temporary. "You can stay as long as you need," he said over dinner. "But I think you're going to want your own walls soon." He was right. I found a 1-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of an old converted machine shop on Aldridge Street. Exposed brick, radiator heat, windows that needed convincing to open. Nothing elegant, but it was mine in the specific, grounded way that only things you've chosen for yourself can be. The first night I slept there, the silence was different from the truck. In the truck, the quiet had felt like erasure. In that apartment, it felt like ownership. I bought a folding table and used it as a kitchen counter. I hung my shirts in the closet with careful spacing, like giving them room to breathe. I set my toolbox beside the door. I didn't have much, but what I had, no one could change the password on. A few weeks later, Rick from the Water Authority crew mentioned his father's lawn tractor had been dead since spring. "You take side work?" he asked. "Depends what's wrong with it," I said. The carburetor was fouled. The spark plug was shot. Straightforward. I fixed it in under an hour on a Saturday morning while Rick's father, a retired mail carrier named Clifford, watched from a lawn chair like I was performing something sacred. "What do I owe you?" he asked. "60, I said. He pressed 80 into my hand. "Worth twice that to see something fixed instead of just thrown out." That phrase stayed with me. Fixed instead of thrown out. Word spread the way it does in a small county, not loudly but steadily. A broken railing here, a bathroom exhaust fan there, a sagging gutter that had been ignored since the Obama administration. I wasn't advertising. I was just showing up. Then Clifford mentioned the community center on Weller Avenue. "Lot of older guys over there," he said. "Veterans, widowers. Nobody to call when something in the house stops working." I drove by the following week. Brick building, modest. A hand-painted sign near the door. Weller Avenue Community Resource Center. Inside, a woman in her early 60s sat behind a reception desk, sorting manila folders. "I'm looking for whoever handles facility needs," I said. She looked up over her reading glasses. "That would be me, unfortunately. Gloria Tran." I told her I did small repair work, that I had weekends available, that if they ever needed someone, I was willing to work at reasonable rates. She studied me the way people study offers that seem too simple to trust. "We have a back room," she said finally. Used to be a woodworking shop years ago. Nobody's touched it since. She walked me back. Workbench, pegboard wall, 2 inches of dust, the ghost of sawdust. It smelled like something that used to matter. Would you mind if I cleaned it up? I asked. For what purpose? I hesitated, then I said something I hadn't said out loud before. For men who've forgotten how to fix things, or maybe just lost the reason to. Gloria studied me for a long moment. Why would you do that? Because I needed to fix something. Because I'd been told by silence that I was replaceable, and I needed proof that I wasn't. Because I had spent 9 years putting that house together and been carried out of it in a garbage bag. But I didn't say any of that. Because I know what it feels like, I said, to feel useless in your own space. Her expression shifted. You can use the room. No charge. Just don't burn it down. I spent 2 Saturdays cleaning and organizing. The 3rd Saturday, 4 men showed up. Clifford, a retired Navy mechanic named Garrett, a quiet Korean War veteran's son named Pete, whose wife had passed the previous year, and a younger man named Theo, whose landlord had been ignoring repair requests for 8 months. We started simple, replacing faucet cartridges, patching drywall, safely changing a breaker. No lectures, no curriculum, just hands moving and learning. Halfway through that first afternoon, Garrett looked at me across the workbench. Why are you doing this for free? I wiped my hands on a shop rag. Because nobody taught me either. That wasn't entirely true. My father had taught me plenty before he died. What I meant was something harder to say. No one had taught me how to rebuild when something bigger than a pipe fitting breaks. The group grew quietly. 4 became 9. 9 became 15. One man brought his adult son. Another brought coffee every week without being asked. One afternoon, Pete said something so simple it stopped the whole room. Good to feel like I matter somewhere. I just nodded. I understood that sentence more than he knew. Then one evening, Gloria handed me a folded section of the County Weekly, page 4. A small feature about community organizations, with a photo of the workshop. Me in mid-sentence, pointing at a railing bracket. 3 men watching with their hands in their pockets. Local volunteer teaches neighbors. The value of self-sufficiency. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't built a business. I hadn't become wealthy. But I'd built something that didn't require anyone's permission and couldn't be taken with a password change. That night, I set the paper carefully on the folding table in my apartment. I didn't know it yet, but someone across town would eventually see it. And when they did, the story they'd been telling about me would no longer be the only version in circulation. 5 years is long enough for a wound to scar over and for the person who caused it to start reframing what happened as something more bearable. By year 5, the workshop at Weller Avenue had a clipboard waiting list. 15 men had become 38. We weren't just fixing faucets. We were installing grab bars in bathrooms so elderly residents didn't fall. We were replacing rotted porch steps so nobody's mother went through the wood. We were teaching adult sons how to repair what their landlords ignored. I had quietly incorporated it under the name First Mile Workshop. Not poetic, practical. Most people don't fail at the hard part. They fail at the starting. The county paper ran a longer piece, this one with a reporter who spent an entire Saturday afternoon in the room, talking to the men, photographing the pegboard wall I'd repainted twice. She asked me why I'd started it. People deserve to feel capable in their own homes, I said. That's not a luxury, it's dignity. The article ran on a Sunday. By Tuesday, my phone had more notifications than I knew what to do with. By Wednesday afternoon, a message arrived that I hadn't expected. LinkedIn? From Miriam? Warren, I saw the piece about your workshop. I always knew you had something important to give. Damon and I were just talking about how much you've grown into this. Maybe it's time we reconnected. I read it 3 times. I always knew. That line sat wrong in a particular way. Knowing requires presence. She hadn't been present in the ShopRite parking lot. She hadn't been present when my card was declined. She hadn't been present when I sat in Marcus's spare room, relearning what it felt like to be somewhere I was wanted. I set the phone down and looked out the apartment window. The radiator clicked. A bus passed on the street below. 5 years ago, I had scraped frost off the inside of my windshield with an old rewards card. Now 38 men showed up every Saturday because someone decided they were worth showing up for. And the woman who had handed me a garbage bag and opened the front door was proud I didn't respond. Not that day. Not the next. 2 days later, another message. I've thought about that night a lot. We made mistakes. I think I was scared of losing Damon and I didn't handle it fairly. I hope you can understand that. Then, 3 days after that, a text from a number I'd stored under Damon M. for reasons I no longer remembered. Hey, Warren. Mom showed me the article. Looks like things worked out. Guess the reset was what you needed. De-reset. I stared at that word. He had stood in the doorway with his arms crossed while I packed my clothes into a garbage bag, and now he was congratulating himself for the outcome. I called Marcus that night. She reached out, I said. Of course she did. No hesitation. You have a nonprofit and a newspaper story. You're no longer the guy who was inconvenient. You're the guy who built something. That's a cynical reading. It's an accurate one. I didn't want it to be. But I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened Miriam's Facebook page. She'd shared the article. Her caption read, "So glad to see Ethan Warren doing meaningful work. Some people just need room to find their purpose. Room to find their purpose." The revision was seamless. The story had been sanded smooth. I had been repositioned as someone who left in pursuit of a calling, who had found himself through distance, whose absence from that house had been generous, a mutual evolution. I scrolled through the comments. People called her gracious, mature, supportive. Several people used the word exes, even though we'd never formally divorced. Just quietly legally separated a year after I left. I sat in the apartment for a long time after that. It wasn't rage I felt. It was something closer to insult. 5 years of building something real. 5 years of apartment furniture and Saturday workshops and slowly learning how to stand in a life I'd constructed from scratch. And now that work was being packaged as a sabbatical she'd encouraged. I walked down to the workshop. It was evening. Empty fluorescent lights, buzzing softly. I stood in the center of the room and ran my palm along the edge of the main workbench. Scarred from use, nicked and worn and absolutely solid. That was when I decided. I had let the first narrative go unchallenged, the one where I needed space, where I had chosen to step back. That version had already spread as far as it was going to. But this one, the one where she had watched from a dignified distance as I grew into my potential, this one I wasn't going to let stand. Not for revenge, for record. I went home, sat at the folding table, and opened the file cabinet I kept beside the bookshelf. Inside was a folder I hadn't touched in 4 years, labeled simply January. 3 things inside. A screenshot of the text Miriam sent the morning after I left. Let's not make this complicated. Damon just needs stability right now. A bank statement showing my name, removed from the joint account 7 days after I slept in that parking lot, and a USB drive. The USB drive was the one that mattered. The house had a doorbell camera system I'd installed myself, registered to a cloud account in my name. After I left, Miriam changed the device password, but the cloud registration remained mine for 2 more days. During that window, 2 clips had uploaded automatically. One of them showed the porch. It wasn't dramatic footage. No shouting, no confrontation. It was worse than that. It was calm. Miriam's voice, clear in the cold air. Warren, you need to go tonight. This isn't working for Damon, and it isn't working for me. And Damon in the background, visible over her shoulder, arms crossed, watching. I'd kept the clip, not as ammunition, but as memory insurance. Trauma blurs itself over time. The video kept the edges sharp. I plugged the drive into my laptop and watched it once. The angle was slightly off-center. The porch light threw shadows across my face. I looked smaller than I remembered feeling. When it ended, I opened a blank document. I wrote the date at the top, January 19th, 19 degrees. Then I wrote what happened. No embellishment, no editorial, just sequence. What she said, what I packed, where I slept, what my card said when I tried to use it, what her cousin said the narrative was, what her Facebook post implied about her role in my story. I wrote the line that had been forming since I read her first LinkedIn message. Knowing requires presence. You were not present in the ShopRite parking lot. You were not present when the bank confirmed my name had been removed. You were not present when I signed the separation papers without you. So please don't tell people you always knew. I read it twice. Then I added the last paragraph. I'm not writing this to cause you harm. I'm writing it because I will not be rewritten. The workshop exists because I needed to rebuild something after you took my access to everything else. That is the actual story. It belongs to me. I attached the bank statement. I attached the porch clip. I sent it to her LinkedIn message at 11:48 p.m. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of a life that was entirely, unambiguously mine. She called at 6:22 the next morning. I let it ring twice. Hello? I didn't think you still had that. Her voice was thinner than I remembered. That's not the point, I said. She exhaled. I wasn't trying to hurt you with the posts, but you were trying to reframe it. Silence. I told people a version, she said finally. That was easier to explain. Easier for who? For me. For Damon. And for me? She didn't answer that. I didn't think you'd actually struggle, she said quietly. You're capable. You always just handled things. Capable people still deserve fairness, I said. Capability doesn't cancel out what happened. I know that now. I'm not your redemption arc, Miriam, I said. If you want any kind of conversation between us going forward, it starts with accuracy, not aversion. What actually happened? I know, she said. And Damon? A pause. He doesn't think he did anything wrong. Then that's where it stays. The call ended without resolution, not with a fight, not with closure, just with the truth out in the open air between us, no longer mine alone to carry. 2 days later, Renata messaged me again. Heard Miriam's been quiet. Everything okay? I typed. It's honest now, that's better. That evening, Gloria texted me a screenshot. Miriam's post, the article share, the room to find his purpose caption, had been quietly deleted. No new post, no explanation, just absence. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something harder to name. Balanced, like a load that had been carried unevenly, had finally been set down properly. 2 weeks after that phone call, I was at the workshop early on a Sunday when my phone buzzed. Miriam. I stepped outside and answered. "Can we meet?" she asked. "In person, I need to say something that doesn't translate over a phone." I thought about it. Not long, but carefully. Coffee shop on Drummond. 4 o'clock. She was already there when I arrived. The place smelled like espresso and warm bread. The same shop we'd stopped at on Sunday mornings years ago before everything. She was seated at a corner table and she looked worn in the way that doesn't show up in photographs. Tired in a way that belongs to reckoning. She stood briefly when I approached. I sat down across from her. "I watched the clip again," she said, "after you sent it." "Okay." I heard myself. She looked at her hands. "I sound cold." "You were." "I was scared," she said. "Damon had been in a bad place. No job, no direction, angry all the time. I thought if I didn't hold him together, he'd fall apart completely. And I thought you were solid enough to handle it. So I got sacrificed for being capable." She didn't argue with that framing. "Yes," she said, "essentially." The honesty surprised me. No buffer, no softening, and just an admission that cost her something. "I told people you left," she continued, "because saying I asked you to go was harder to say out loud. Saying it out loud meant saying that I chose Damon over you, and I wasn't ready to say that. But you were ready to do it." "Yes." We sat with that for a moment. "Damon won't apologize," she said quietly. "He says you made him feel judged." "I asked him to rinse his dishes." "I know." "Then that's where that story ends," I said. "I'm not interested in an apology from someone who doesn't believe one is warranted." She nodded slowly. "We made a mistake. And this time it wasn't deflection. It was just a tired woman saying a true thing. Regret doesn't announce itself. It settles." "I didn't build the workshop because of what you did," I said. "I built it because I needed proof I wasn't disposable. It turned out to be real. That happened in spite of that night. Not because of it." Her eyes filled slightly. "I know." She looked up at me. "I'm not asking for anything. I just couldn't let the last conversation we'd had be the one with the clip attached." "I understand that," I said. We sat for another 10 minutes. Not as husband and wife. Not as people with claims on each other. Just as two people who had shared years and damage and were now trying to be honest about both. When she stood to leave, she paused. "I am proud of what you built," she said. "Not because I had anything to do with it. Just because I can see what it means." "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. We left separately. A few weeks later, a check arrived at the workshop. $250, no memo, signed M. Dalton. I deposited it the way I deposited every other donation. No ceremony. Damon never reached out. I didn't wait for it. Some people don't make it to accountability, no matter how clearly you show them the map. Over the following year, the workshop added a Wednesday session. A young paramedic named Jonah started volunteering once a month on basic home safety. The clipboard waiting list stayed full. Sometimes on evenings after a long day, I drive past the old house on Haverford Lane. Not to linger, just to confirm something to myself. The porch steps I rebuilt are still there. The side garage I resided is still standing straight. The back deck I built board by board on a borrowed Saturday is weathered now, but solid. Things I build tend to hold. I still have the same truck. Fixed the heater 2 years ago. Took longer than it should have because I kept putting it off. On difficult days, I sometimes sit in the driver's seat for a few minutes before turning the key. Not because I miss the cold, because I remember it. And I remember the man who stayed inside it for 3 nights and didn't collapse. I tell this story not so you'll condemn Miriam. Fear makes people do small, harmful things to protect something they're terrified of losing. I understand that. But understanding doesn't dissolve impact. What I know now is this. You can be steady and still deserve to be treated fairly. You can be capable and still deserve not to be carried out in a trash bag. You can be the person everyone leans on and still have the right to say, "This is my house," and mean it. Forgiveness isn't amnesia. It's choosing which weight you're done carrying. 5 years ago, I sat in a parking lot at 2 a.m. because someone decided I was in the way. Today, 38 men show up every week because someone decided they matter. My name is Warren Doyle. I'm 58 years old, and I was never the problem. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever been quietly asked to leave your own life and told it was for the best, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what line you wish you'd drawn sooner, or the one you finally drew. We share stories like this every week because sometimes the only way forward is to stop pretending the other version is true. Subscribe if you want to keep walking this road with us. Share this if you know someone who needs to hear it. And remember, capable doesn't mean optional. Strong doesn't mean fair game. See you next time.